Good afternoon, and welcome to the Melody of Joy Institute presentation on the Emancipation Proclamation. I am Queen Hostess Claudette Reddick, your host for today, and our featured guest and founder is Miss Joy Sigur Ramza. Help me, Joy, with that name. I get that, New Orleans name, a French name all twisted on my tongue.
Well, believe me, thank you so much, Claudette, for consenting to being here. I want to thank the CAN TV production as well for the opportunity to be able to share with them our 42 months
now.
Journey, the Emancipation Proclamation, and exploring the spiritual significance of our American journey here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joy, for agreeing for this interview. I see that the Emancipation Proclamation is a very important presentation for you. Why is that? How did you come to the Emancipation Proclamation in your thoughts?
Yeah, an excellent question, and it is something that sort of fills me each time I go through it, because 41 months ago, I was in a very serious affliction on my body. My spine twisted, in pain. It would take me 2 hours to get out of the bed. And it was a very, very painful period for me for about 3 years. And I finally decided, to stand and say, you know what, God, I'm tired of this. And if there is a reason for this continual affliction, then it's worth it. But if this is a lot that you've given to me for my life to just live in this kind of pain every day and not being able to take care of myself, then you can just take me out. Just let me get enough time to get my business straight, because it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And so very tearfully I stood in my living room, because I knew that I knew what I was saying. And I understand people who are in pain, and when sometimes they end their lives. I understand that, because I was ready to do and be at peace with it.
Because the pain was so great.
It was great. It was very great. My
continuous.
lights in my bathroom stayed on for almost a year. I couldn't even straighten my back up to turn the light off. It told me that I had a body of a 104-year-old woman.
Ooh.
So when I made that decision, I was at peace with that. A few days after that, the voice came to me and Spirit said, do you know the Emancipation Proclamation? I said, oh yeah, I know that. Still, nothing else. About 3 or 4 days later, the voice came again to me and said, I want you to teach on it. I said, well, I don't really know that. I'm sure someone in the audience know what that is. You say, yeah, I know it. And then you turn around and say, ooh, no, not really. And so that's where I found myself, saying yes and then saying no. I started January 15, 2014, and sure enough, I started. And I said to the Spirit, I said, you know what? If I mess up, this is on you.
So out of all this pain came this revelation, if you will, for you to begin taking on this serious presentation.
Well, it wasn't so much a revelation at that time. It was just an assignment that I knew very little about. I knew the Emancipation Proclamation had freed the slaves who were in the rebellious states in the Union during the Civil War. But be honest with you, I really knew nothing more than that. And so I took it seriously. I said, well, I have to read it. I had never read it, so I had to go read it.
Okay, so in this time that you were recuperating, if you will, because we can see now you've got full movement of the body, doesn't look like any affliction is upon you. So you've come quite a ways with this, you say anointing?
I would say anointing, and through my desire to be obedient. I've always loved my history. Let me speak that. I'm a music major from Xavier University, And I love the spirituals. And I always felt that the presence of God was always in my history.
Okay.
Through the songs and the music. That's as far as I could go with it. I knew the presence was there, but I didn't know anything other than that or what to do. And because of that, knowing, I always reverence my history. And that has always been a joy, but it's difficult to speak on that and to really share it to the degree that it enabled me to be able to say God was really there. Mm-hmm. But with the Emancipation Proclamation, when I decided to read it, and the first thing that I came to know was that this was a document of a divine nature. In the Emancipation Proclamation, the presence of God is acknowledged 5 times, and then there's a prayer. And that to me just warmed my heart, because I said, my goodness, you mean to tell me this man, this president, Abraham Lincoln, was a man of prayer, a man of spiritual consciousness?
And it was a presidential proclamation that he decided it was time for the country to move forward in. And in your reading and understanding of the importance and the deep value that this document has, you have come across those spiritual points you talked about, and you extracted 5 of them. In the 42 months that you've been doing these monthly presentations, you continue to bring these 5 important points to the audiences. Tell us about them.
Well, you know, they're not just points, but they are really pillars and principles that are in the Emancipation Proclamation that God has enabled me to pull out. Number 1, as I said, it's a spiritual document. Mm-hmm. God is mentioned 5 times, and there's a prayer there. And any believer understands that with the magnitude of that document, even though it was a presidential proclamation, and that proclamation is only enforced in the time that the original president was there. There's certain powers that are there, but they're powers that can be wiped away by the next president, okay? Mm-hmm. And we see that current today. I had no idea. I thought presidential proclamation was a law, but that's not good. I learned that. And so it's a spiritual document. It's a divine document in that it was inspired. Number 2, it's a document that is legal. It is a document that had to be not only inspired with the consciousness of the man, but it also had to be taken within the frame of the United States Constitution. In other words, there had to be a document that is ironclad, that any legislation or anyone who be debate the authenticity or the legality of it, it had to be within the frame of the U.S. Constitution. So here this man is proposing this act, and people are fighting it, but he was within his constitutional powers to do that. So the third was it's a moral document that, as we know, moral of right or wrong, but he was able to, for the first time, do through legislature means to, number 1, bring to the people's attention that, and to the world, hey, slavery is a reality here in this country that has said that we are a country that is free. We, the people of the United States, you know, are endowed, you know, and so you go on with these things. So here you have a moral document that allows the American spirit to bridge back into the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, bridge into the preamble of the Constitution. Now see, that is where the presence of God is acknowledged, yes, because the Constitution in itself are where the laws and the legislations are. But if you know, it says ordained.
Okay.
And so ordained, that means that this country and the Constitution is under our higher authority. So then the Emancipation Proclamation bridges back into the original intent of this country.
The Constitution.
Yes. So the fourth thing is that it's a generational document that impacts generations.
Okay.
It impacts the slaves, the emancipated slaves. And then the fifth, I'll go into that, how that impacts on me, because I get a little full on that one.
Okay.
And then the fifth is that it's an educational tool that should be a part of every aspect of education in the homes, in the schools, and in the churches. And it's almost non-existent now.
So you say these five important points of the Emancipation Proclamation include a spiritual component, a legal component, a moral component, and an impactful one for generations yet to come. And finally, it's also an educational tool.
Absolutely.
Well, Joy, tell me how you have been able to, well, let's start at the beginning. When you first began having your monthly presentations on the third Sunday of the month,
at 3 o'clock.
What kind of people did you seek to come to this? What kind of people were you looking for? Were these people who were in school, or were they historians? Who were the people?
The people.
You wanted to hear this first.
Good question. The people whose phone numbers are in my phone, and that's what I started out with. And thank God, Facebook. No, I didn't even bother with Facebook. I just started with my phone.
Okay.
I just started with the people in my
that
phone.
you knew.
That I knew, and they brought their children, and and I really didn't know quite what to do with it other than just giving the truth. And at that time, I didn't even have the 5 points. I just had the 2 words, Emancipation Proclamation. And thank God for technology. I did a little Googling, and I learned that I could get a lot of information. I always presented videos, and one of the most impressive videos that I have, and it's still dear to me, is the Children's March in Birmingham.
Oh, yes.
We're people who walk as close as we can to the Spirit of God. Not always understood. But we do our best.
We do our best.
Let me not speak for everybody. Let me speak for Joy. And so one of the things I couldn't believe that the Birmingham March was for children. And I remember when I was in New Orleans and I saw this going on, but I didn't know those were children. I thought they were adults. I'm from New Orleans, and so across the Mason-Dixon line is what we referenced it. The things that the northern Negroes at that time, are blacks or Afro-American or whatever, didn't experience the same thing that I did in the South, because so much was censored. And when I saw this happening, I said, oh my God, what is this? Because when I was in high school and they integrated the schools in New Orleans, I was in a Catholic school, and the nuns pulled us all down to come into the auditorium and said, look, they're rioting across the 9th Ward. And so to have your parents to come and pick you up. And I said, yeah, and pick you up across the 9th Ward. We were on the other side of the canal. And I said, well, shucks, I can go home. Because I didn't understand this black and white stuff. I didn't really understand this racism. I really didn't understand that. I get home. I ride the bus every day. I ride the bus, no problem. And so I went home. And then I realized that this race thing was really serious. This was a serious issue. And what has that done? It was the Emancipation Proclamation and the Birmingham March and seeing these things, is that I looked at the Emancipation Proclamation as something that was specifically dealing with my ancestors and liberating them from those physical bondages.
Yes.
But then as I continue with this study, I began to understand that there was no time given to teach those slave masters or the slave masters' children or the slaves, that there was something seriously wrong, that there was an injustice, that the 3/5 mentality as how they looked at my ancestors is still the same kind of image that they're holding in the mind. And because
That they weren't complete
Weren't
human
completely
beings,
human.
they were just a
Right.
bit less than, say, the white people in their valuation.
yeah.
The people of color, the people enslaved, they were only given a certain degree of value, and it was always less.
And I was taught
than what
that,
they
and I
had.
couldn't understand that mathematics. What you mean it take three of us to meet one of these? You know, I didn't understand this kind of mathematics, you know. And one of the things that's impacting on me now is, you know, when they would take us to the Robert Lee Circle, and I spoke that last month. As a child, they would take us to the Robert E. Lee Circle, and we would bring flowers to Robert E. Lee, and we would sing songs, and I would cry. They said, yeah, he stood for our way of life, and those people in the North came down here, that Grant, and they changed our way of life. And I said, daggone Yankees. Robert E. Lee was such a good man, he wanted us to stay with our way of life. Well, the only life I knew was my grandma. I love my grandma, I love my grandpa, and my great-grandpa. I knew my great-grandfathers. And so all I knew was love. No one really taught me that my way of the South was a loving place. But I didn't know that he was on the side of slavery, because it never really taught.
Because you shared with me that your family, just a couple of generations back, actually had slaves in the family. Is that what you were saying to me?
No.
Or it's been a few generations that you can recall?
No, I had slaves, but no, I don't know that much about my history to that degree. No, what I had my great grandmother, for instance, like for with my father's mother, I can only go back 2 generations.
Okay.
My mother's
That's the 2 generations I'm hearing.
two generations, but my grandfather, I don't know anybody else but him.
Okay.
Oh my God, you're gonna make me cry. But anyway, so with my mother's family though, we go back. I can go back about 4 generations with her, on her father's side. But then her mom, I only can go back 2 generations. So, working with this Emancipation Proclamation, with the generational impact, I began to understand that a lot of our behaviors was induced through the sin, the slave institution network.
Yes, slave institution
Slave
network.
institution work.
That's the sin.
And
yes.
that's the sin. And it is slave institution. It is an institution without walls. And when you take a people and you say, okay, the taxation, the 3/5 started off with taxation. But after 244 years, this is something that's very, very important for people to understand, that when the Emancipation Proclamation was proclaimed, and the United States was only 87 years old, but slavery institution network was 244 years. So slavery is older than the country.
Yes.
That's so important to understand. One of the things with Abraham Lincoln, he says, I don't even know what it is, when he was dealing with the Nebraska and the Missouri, he says, we don't even have a way of knowing where it came from. He said, I've been searching. He said, all I have ever seen it being regulated, and rules and regulations. But we have no way of knowing how this happened. And when he said that, I said, well, all right, I'm in good company. You have this man, and he was a praying person, and he lost his mother when he was 9 years old. And I could relate to that loss because my father died when I was 8 years old. And I remember my father very, very well. Some of the lessons that he taught to me is when I'm crossing the street and how to look out for the car. So his mother impacted on him even at 9 years old. And that's something to not take for granted, the bond that a child has with their parent. And there's love there. And this is something with generational, is that with the coming of the Emancipation Proclamation, it allowed an opening and an opportunity for us to have a family.
Let's talk about that, because it's going to take us to this whole aspect of posterity.
Posterity.
And family is one of the greatest, well, results of this new legislation that we as a people were able to achieve. Can you tell us some of the background on that story? We didn't have a family at first, and all of a sudden I got a daddy and a mama.
Well, you didn't have a daddy and a mama, you had a man and a woman. My ancestors were not, many of them were not aware of marriage because
It's prohibited, probably.
prohibited because there was another way of life and they had another purpose. And their purpose was to be servants and to be slaves. And the 3/5 consciousness comes in, it's saying, Spirit has shown me that one of the things that happened to us, our ancestors were void of their divinity, their relationship with God, because the church supported it. You see, one of the things I love about this sacred time, is because we have the North and the South, and both were utilizing the scriptures.
Yeah, that same Bible, huh?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
And so we were taught to be good slaves by the scriptures, those of us who were privy to hear it. And many of the preachers and missionaries of that time, they were slave owners and some of the most vicious. Now, this is not just hearsay, this is historically founded.
Correct, yes.
And so the divinity, we were severed from that, and also we were severed from our humanity. Because it took, because it took 3 of us to make one white, right? And that means that we part human. In order for me to have this kind of a discussion, and I'm so happy that I'm able to do this with the audience here, is the fact that I have grown to the point that I'm not angry. And that, as you saw the picture before, I shed tears for the Confederate Army. Because in looking at the Civil War, there were boys, young men. When the Civil War ended, 1/4 of the male population in the South was gone.
I believe it.
And our ancestors, because I say we, but no, I was not them, I'm me. They paid a price in order for me to be able to sit across this table and speak to you in a place like this. An opportunity for them to have actual freedom, to learn what freedom is. We understand that for our ancestors, freedom was just a word. It was just an idea. But they did not have the knowledge of understanding the responsibility. And in those people in the society that they were released into, those individuals, they needed to be taught too that they were human beings.
Can we go back briefly to this idea of family? They weren't mommy and daddy. And so what happened with that family makeup? You said there was none. What were the men there for? What were the women there for? They had a purpose as servants, but...
The purpose was we were commodities. Our ancestors were commodities.
Yeah.
And so when the slave ships would come in, you were paying a pretty big buck to get a slave. So the whole point of the males were to be bucks, the women to be breeders, which means that there's no love there. You're trained to, you go into the woman, you impregnate her, and she has the baby.
And she moves
and
on?
No, he don't. He moves on.
Oh, he moves
Yeah, because once you're pregnant, you can't be pregnant with one time. At a time, the babies, So it made made the slave master have to make fewer trips. And then trips to the slave ship, because it took only a few months, 9 months to make a baby, right?
Yes.
In fact, it was interesting when I went to New Orleans and they told a story of the traveling rental farms. The rental farms, yeah, and the rental farms were women. They would take
Oh.
the women and they would rent them out for a year to different plantations. How interesting.
Yes.
And they would have the babies, they would impregnate them, and it'd take about 9 months, and they would get the fertile ones.
I smile.
Scientific. It was scientifically, it was scientifically done. Now, I'm not smiling because it was a fun time for anybody. It was a horrific time. Now that I have had this assignment, I understand it, that this is a story that has to be told. It's not a story that's charging anyone. This is why we have the situation that in our community, because there's so many of us who don't know the story and understanding that the men were not committed to family. There was no teachings about these things. These are things that have to be taught. Love has to be taught. Family has to be taught.
Are these the kind of stories you focus on in your presentation? Because, just walking the street, and I mentioned the Emancipation Proclamation to the average black person, it's like, that's not my, you weren't talking about me. And yet you continue for 42 months to bring the value to the table and the understanding that you got to know the story and you got to let go of the anger, if you will, and just deal with it objectively as possible.
He says, my people who are called by my name, humble themselves. I look at the period that I went through with all that pain. That was an humbling experience to me. But I understood that if, as a grandmother, I know that my time is now. And I know that if I say God is a God of love, then okay, Joy, let's straighten this up and get yourself together.
I want to thank you for the information you've provided, the world today. So many of us don't fully understand this document. I guess it might take another 142 months to bring out all the important aspects of this, but I can certainly appreciate your effort to enlighten us and to encourage us to release those past thoughts, the anger about this, and move forward in America today. Well, again, would you like to leave us with any closing word?
One of the things I want to close is to understand any of this. The 13th, the 14th, and 15th Amendments were amendments in the Constitution that actually extracted from the Emancipation Proclamation. The 13th was abolishment of slavery just for those individuals that were in the chains. The 14th Amendment allowed the posterity protection, and it says equal protection under the law, and it allows for naturalization if a child is born in America to be an American. It's very important to understand that 13th and 14th Amendment, I got to put it in it, whatever. The 14th Amendment was expressly for the emancipated Americans.
Again.
And the 15th was the right for the males to have a vote. They always trumped us. But the 14th Amendment was very, very important because it also enabled our white sisters to be able to fight for their rights and be protected for women's suffrage. It's been beneficial, but it's very important to understand that the 13th, 14th, and 15th was the constitutional enforcement of the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, thank you.
Thank you. Again, I want to say how important and appreciative we are that you have taken this assignment, this anointment, this revelation, and this need to engage us in changing our thoughts about this important document today. So again, my appreciation, Ms. Joy Seeger Ramza.
Thank you, and thank you. And as we close it, saying the emancipator is in you. God bless you.
Thank you.
You need to slow down your pace. It's such a rush to have more. You're willing to change your face, pretending that you're okay while they strip you away, and then you